Attention Idaho and California residents. If you're shopping for a mortgage, contact PacFi, a mortgage brokerage with the top wholesale lenders in the nation. They are committed to simplifying the mortgage process, saving you time and money. Call 858-442-7048 or visit pacfi.com. NMLS number 1462943, Equal Housing Lender. Welcome to the Alcohol Tipping Point podcast. I'm your host, Debbie Maisner, registered nurse, health coach, and badass. Oh, I should say alcohol-free badass, but badass. Today on the show is a special guest, Kristin Candelore. I want to thank you for coming on, Kristen. Welcome.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me. I'm super excited to be here.
Now, where are you calling from?
I am calling from right outside Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, a little town called Conshohocken.
East side. Okay. East Coast you're representing. That's great.
Yes.
Yes. And tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do. Just a background.
Yeah, for sure. So obviously, as you said, my name's Kristen. I am born and raised in Pennsylvania. I've lived in the suburbs of Philadelphia most of my life. I am 9 months sober today, so I'm excited to share that.
Congratulations.
And I thank you so much. I have a 1.5-year-old daughter, and obviously with that timing, she was born during the pandemic, so I'll talk a little bit more about that later. But I work in the hospitality industry, which I pretty much always have. I studied hospitality management in school and found my way into a career in that industry, which I know not a lot of people actually do. So I've always worked in restaurants. Most recently, I transitioned into working in HR for a restaurant group that I've worked for about 6 years now. So that was a big transition, having a baby during the pandemic. I was working, prior to getting pregnant in operations. So I was traveling anywhere between 5 and 7 days a week, all over. So I was going mostly along the East Coast to, Chicago, Miami, Vegas, all over. So, having a baby, transitioning from traveling constantly to working from home and having a newborn was a big transition. So that's kind of where I am now. Like I said, 9 months into my alcohol-free journey and getting settled into, my new normal.
Yeah. So what was your experience with drinking?
Oh boy. So I would say, when I was younger, I would describe my experience with drinking. And when I say younger, I mean teenage years, 16, 17. I would say it was pretty normal. I mean, I grew up knowing that I had alcoholism in my family, but nothing that ever directly affected my life. I had a really normal, great childhood, awesome parents, a lot of support growing up. And I started drinking when everybody else started drinking in high school. Like, we were going to parties and, I experimented with drinking when I was, around 16 years old. And, at the time it just felt normal. Like, that's what everybody was doing. So that's what I did. But even now, thinking back to my early drinking days, like, I can even remember experiencing blackouts in my teenage years, which, I don't really think that's normal. So that's something that, now in sobriety that I've thought a lot about. And then I would say, going into college and my early 20s is when I sort of knew that I had a problem with alcohol. I would consider myself pretty type A. I'm a very controlling person. I am a pretty self-aware person, sometimes to a fault, but I just always kind of knew deep down, like, what I was doing wasn't normal. I was always like the person who was down to go out if he wanted to go out. I would get wine and drink wine at home, by myself, which, isn't normal. And I just, I thought about drinking a lot. I wasn't somebody that, in my early 20s was drinking every single day, but I thought about it a lot. And then as my career progressed, the restaurant industry is definitely something that supports drinking, and not to a fault. It's just it just is what it is. But going out for drinks after work, and when you're working in that industry, your schedule is sort of not normal. I would have off during the week versus on the weekend. So that kind of gave me an excuse to drink, Tuesday night, Wednesday night, and then the weekend would come around and I'd be working, but it was the weekend. So, I would drink anyway. And then I started traveling, and I would say that's when I really started to realize this is becoming a problem. I always kept it under control. I wasn't like drinking and going to work or anything like that, but I was traveling alone and found myself, ending most work days either in a hotel room with a bottle of wine or at a restaurant with a bottle of wine. And it just became a really bad habit. So that's the first time that I started to think about not drinking anymore. I started going to therapy. I started talking somewhat openly to a therapist about what my drinking habits looked like. I wouldn't say that I was completely honest about it, but we started talking about it. She started making suggestions, cut back on drinking, try moderation. She definitely did suggest trying to stop altogether. But ultimately, I was never able to do that. And moderation was exhausting. I mean, just, I found myself constantly setting goals for myself. Like, I'll only have X amount of drinks, or I'll go home at this time, or I'm only going to drink this many times this week. And I was just never able to stick to it. So it became a really, really bad, just kind of circle. I was just doing the same thing every week. Going to therapy, I'd go a couple days here and there without drinking, but ultimately would just fall right back into it. And then I unexpectedly found out that I was going to have a baby, which was the best surprise ever. We weren't planning on it. We planned on waiting a couple more years, but I was married, my husband and I were thrilled. And ultimately, I would say that my pregnancy put a Band-Aid on my drinking problem. I experienced a lot of happiness during my pregnancy. Like I've dealt with anxiety and depression in my past. And sometimes they say when you go through pregnancy that, people who have experienced depression sometimes experience the opposite during pregnancy. And that was definitely true for me. I felt great. I felt really, really happy. I had no anxiety. Drinking was no longer an option. I know that some people do struggle with drinking throughout their pregnancies, but for me, I was able to stop as soon as I found out I was pregnant. So those 9 months were great. And I remember saying, like, I can't imagine going back to drinking. Like, my anxiety's gone. I feel, I have more energy. I feel happier. But after my daughter was born, it didn't take long for me to kind of go right back into my old habits. And I think, a part of my story obviously was, my daughter was born in February 2020. So
Wow.
It really was right before everything, shut down. And she was born 7 weeks early. So, she spent a month in the NICU, which obviously was very challenging. And, I think that there's just a lot of things that happened that I could kind of blame my habits on when I did start drinking again. Like, it's a pandemic, I have a newborn and all of these things. But, ultimately looking back on my past, I always knew that there was a problem there. So it definitely took, I would say, a few little rock bottoms. I never got in legal trouble. I never hurt anybody. I never hurt myself. But my life was just deteriorating. And, something that I've learned in sobriety is that, somebody who struggles with alcoholism, it really does, it grows, right? So, I was drinking at the end of every day, we were getting wine delivered when everything was closed. And that's sort of how I started drinking again after my pregnancy. And then, a bottle turned into two. My husband and I moved. A lot of things were happening. I was working from home. He works in the medical field, so he was going into work every day. And that's when I would say a pretty serious postpartum depression really set in for me. And the thing about that is, when you're in it, you really you can't recognize it. And when I look at my behavior now, it's hard to imagine how I didn't see what was happening to me. But, even aside from the drinking, I was not exercising. There were days where, even brushing my teeth felt like just too big a task. So I was really suffering, and I would say the postpartum depression is what brought out what I feared my drinking could always be, if that makes sense. In all of those years where I knew deep down I had a problem, but never let it get to, quote unquote, alcoholic behavior. Like I wasn't drinking during the day. I wasn't going to work drunk. I was never doing any of those things. And then after I had my daughter, going through that postpartum depression, it brought out the absolute worst. A couple drinks a day turned into more and more. And it really just spiraled, and it spiraled quickly for me. I mean, you hear about people who struggle for years and years. So hindsight being 2020, I'm, in a sense thankful for the postpartum experience, because I've learned so much from it. But, it did take a couple really difficult situations for me to say enough is enough, and, I need to change my life. And I also want to say that I didn't do that alone. I would love to say that ultimately I woke up one morning and said, I'm going to stop drinking. But it wasn't like that. It's with my husband kind of saying, like, enough is enough, something has to change. So, yeah, that was 9 months ago that he said to me, we've got to make a change here. And, I have a really supportive family. My husband has been amazing through this entire process. So, he played a really big part in my decision to stop drinking, and the fact that I've made it 9 months. I have a lot of support. So that was a very long-winded answer, but that's where I am now.
Well, congratulations on 9 months sober. I mean, I can't imagine having a baby during the pandemic. My kids are 12 and 15. And and I also had postpartum depression as well.
Okay.
Obviously I was a heavy drinker too.
Sure.
So can you talk a little bit more about what postpartum depression looked like for you, when it started, and what you did to help with that?
Yeah, absolutely. I've read a lot about it now, now that I've gotten through it. And I've learned a lot. And I think one of the biggest misconceptions about postpartum depression is that it really only presents in a way where, you don't feel connected with your baby. Because, obviously I can't speak for anybody else, but for me, those were the stories that I always heard about postpartum depression. Your baby is born and you don't feel a connection to them, or you don't want to hold them, or things like that. And I never felt like that. I wanted to be with my daughter every single second. She was in the NICU, so I wasn't able to do that. So I'm sure that played a part. I wasn't able to take her home right away. We were there for a month, so that was really difficult. But I never experienced a feeling of not being bonded with her. So I think in the beginning of my postpartum depression, I had experienced depression before, so I knew what that felt like. And I sort of kept talking myself into, like, this can't be postpartum depression because I'm obsessed with my baby. Like, I want to be with her all the time. So, it can't be that. It has to be something else. And as it progressed, I would say that, the biggest change was just the change in my daily behaviors. I mean, first of all, I can recall a day, after a night of drinking where it was like a light bulb went on in my head. I woke up, I was hungover, I was feeling terrible, that circle of anxiety, wondering what I had done the night before, feeling physically sick. And I just thought, I could have a drink right now and I would feel better. And, my anxiety would go away, my headache would probably go away. And then that was it. Like that sort of became a new way of life for me. And I wouldn't recommend it. It was terrible. I mean, it was, getting through the day, drinking, waking up, feeling like absolute garbage. I mean, I can't think of another way to describe it. Just crippled with anxiety and just thinking to myself, what am I doing? How am I going to get out of this? But ultimately, the only thing that made me feel better, feel normal again, was another drink. So the depression, brought that out. And then I changed so much. I mean, I wasn't prioritizing my work, and I've always been somebody who's very career driven. Thankfully, I had a lot of help with my daughter at the time. So, I had a lot of support there, which I could go on for days about, how thankful I am for that. But as I said earlier, like, brushing my teeth, getting in the shower, just like little things like that were so, so exhausting to me. And that's just not normal. So once I started to, I was just stuck in wanting to get out of this cycle. I wanted to stop drinking so badly because even though I did at a certain point realize that I was suffering from postpartum depression, I knew that no matter what, the first step that I needed to take was eliminating alcohol. As soon as I saw a therapist or a psychiatrist, if I got honest with them about how much I was drinking, that's the first thing that they're going to tell me. And I knew that. So, and there were months where I was seeing a psychiatrist and I was just living in such deep denial. I would get on phone calls with her and I would say, I'm feeling better. Things are improving and, I'm on medication and medication seems to be working. But deep down, I was not telling the truth. I was just, okay, I have an appointment with my psychiatrist today. I have to get on with her. I have to talk to her. And I have to get rid of her, which I feel terrible saying now because she has helped me so much. But, in those first few months, I wasn't ready to really face it. And it did take, a defining moment for my husband to say to me, like, something needs to change. You need to get help. In the few months before my daughter's first birthday is when I was struggling the most. And when I say struggling the most, I mean just I couldn't get it under control at all. I was drinking every single day. And the week leading up to her birthday, I had stopped drinking for a few days. My husband asked me, like, please, don't drink for her first birthday. I want you there. I want you present. And ultimately, I was not able to stay sober for her first birthday, which is a regret that I will carry with me for a long time. And the morning after her birthday was the same cycle, waking up thinking, I missed my daughter's first birthday. I was there physically, but I was not there mentally. I made a fool of myself. I broke a promise to my husband who, has just been by my side this entire time. And I tried to hide it, when I was really deep in active addiction towards the end, I was lying constantly. So that next day, same thing, I have to get rid of this feeling. I want to forget what I did the day before. So I'm going to drink again. And it was on that day where, it was so clear that I had been drinking. He was asking me if I had been drinking. I was saying no. I think about that day now and I don't even know who that person was. It wasn't me, but, so, that day he had said, we need to figure something out. So that's when I brought in, close family, told them what I had been going through, and that, I needed to stop drinking and that I needed some help. And I didn't go to treatment, which is a part of my story that I do like to share because ultimately looking back, I think that I definitely should have. As I know, detoxing from alcohol is the most dangerous substance to stop cold turkey. And those were a few of the most difficult days of my life. I mean, they were very physically taxing, emotionally very heavy. And, you know, although I did get through it and I've stayed sober since, I think that, you know, going to treatment could have made those days a little bit more bearable, and safer, because I frankly was scared, you know, just not sleeping and thinking about what was happening to my body, and, you know, just being really, really afraid. So I think that's an important message to be open about, that, you know, that was probably a mistake to not go to treatment. But, you know, I think I had been hiding so much of my struggle that a lot of the people close to me didn't really realize how bad it actually was. So I didn't have anybody pushing me like, you need to go to rehab, or you need professional help. It was just, you know, stay close to family, take in all the support that, you know, I had, and from there, you know, started slowly telling more people, and now, you know, obviously trying to share my story in as many ways as I can, because I think back to those days where I really was struggling, and, you know, had I been scrolling Instagram in bed one night and saw a new mom who, you know, had struggled with postpartum or struggled with drinking, you know, I would have reached out and said, this, you know, this is happening to me. Like, how did you get out of it? So I just want people to know that, as bad as it seems while you're in it, there is a way out, and, you know, you're definitely not alone, because I know that it feels like you really are, because I felt insanely alone, even though I was surrounded by family every day. I felt, you know, completely by myself. So.
Yeah, it's such a common thing that you hear, that people who are struggling with drinking or addiction, is that feeling that you're the only one. It seems that way, but it's really not true.
Yeah.
So you went more or less cold turkey. What was that like, and then how were you successful?
So, I mean, as I mentioned, the first few days were very, very difficult. You know, physically, I felt very unwell. You know, I wasn't sleeping. I was definitely, you know, I experienced shaking. I experienced a lot of nightmares, a lot of anxiety. You know, the first few days were extremely difficult. And as much as I want to say, like, you know, I went for runs, or I started, you know, working out or eating really healthy, that is not the truth. In the first couple months, actually, I would say my number one focus next to taking care of my daughter was just not drinking. I wanted to prioritize exercising, because I know that helps, but I couldn't do it. I wanted to prioritize, you know, meal prepping, eating healthy, because I knew that would help, but I couldn't do that either. All I could do was not drink. And that took up a lot of energy, because it was new, and it was scary, and I had never been successful doing it before. So, and I knew that this time I had a lot to lose. Like, I had to make it work this time, and I had never let it get so bad, and I didn't want to see what the future would look like if I started drinking again, and I still don't. Resource wise, you know, the first thing I did was I logged into virtual AA meetings. And really, that's because at the time I didn't know of anything else. I didn't know about 1,000 Hours Dry. I didn't know about, you know, all of these amazing online alcohol-free sober communities. I didn't know that those existed. So I started with AA. At the time, there weren't any in-person meetings, so I was just doing them online. And in those first few days, I would say it was extraordinarily helpful, because I didn't know where else to go, and I needed something. You know, I needed to know that there was somebody else who has experienced something similar to this. But what I found initially in AA was that most of the people in those meetings had 5 years, 10 years, 30 years sober. And in my first few days of sobriety, that was very overwhelming to me. And I didn't feel like I could relate to somebody who hasn't had a drink in 30 years. Like, I'm on 3 days and I'm really struggling. So That's what brought me to, I went on Instagram and I typed in hashtag sober, and my eyes opened so wide when I saw, everything that popped up, just so many different resources, um, Quit Lit and podcasts and all of these, amazing sober pages that I follow now. So I transitioned away from AA, and started reaching out online, which has been just a godsend for me. I mean, telling people, I do consider myself an alcoholic, but that's tough to say. So, in the first few months when I started telling people, that was something that was really difficult for me. I think it's something that a lot of people struggle with in early sobriety. How am I going to tell people I'm not drinking? They're going to want to know why. They're going to want to know what happened. And it's tricky. So getting involved in 1,000 Hours, and, speaking on their Instagram page and having, the flexibility to share my story little bits at a time. I didn't necessarily have to jump in on day one and tell my whole life story. So I got to know the community. I shared my story little bits at a time each week. And I found that really helped. It helped me mentally just to unload it, even if no one is watching these stories. It helps to just say it out loud. And it also helped hold me accountable. Like the first wedding I went to sober, it already was easier because I knew that people there, had seen me on Instagram and know that I don't drink. So I didn't have to worry about, pretending to drink, or are people going to ask me if I'm pregnant, or, all of these things that happen when you go to a wedding and don't drink. So that was very, very helpful, and still is. Fast forward a little further into sobriety, I was listening to sobriety podcasts constantly. I was reading all the Quit Lit. I also was reading the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. I was just immersing myself in everything. And along the way, I had heard somebody on a podcast say that, if they went to a wedding and had a glass of champagne to toast a speech, that, they wouldn't consider that a relapse necessarily. And for me, that was really eye-opening because it made me think about what would happen if I did that. If I went to a wedding now, 9 months sober, had a glass of champagne at a wedding for a toast, that would 100% be a relapse for me, because I know that it wouldn't just be one glass. And I play the tape forward and I think about what the rest of the night would look like, what the next day would feel like. And I just knew that I needed something more. And that's sort of what brought me back to AA. So after a couple months of not going, hearing that and thinking, I could never go into an AA meeting and say, I'm thinking about maybe having one glass of wine. No one in the rooms of AA are going to say, yeah, sure. That's a good idea. And I know now, after years of struggling, that, I can't just have one drink. I can't moderate. And just being 100% sober is the right path for me. And I know that AA is a place that's going to hold me accountable to that. So I have gotten more involved in AA. To be fully transparent, I don't have a full-time sponsor. I haven't worked with steps. I haven't really done any of that. I'm going to meetings once a week is the goal. And I'm trying to learn more about it and get more involved, because I think that long term, looking at, hopefully one day when I can say I'm 30 years sober, I think AA will be a really good resource. But I am so thankful that there are so many other options, because there's no right way to get sober. There's not one way to get sober. And I think that's really important, because, AA is not for everybody. And, alcohol-free lifestyle isn't for everybody. And, everybody has a different path. So I think you just have to find what's right for you. You have to recognize what you need. And for me, that is sobriety. And find what's going to keep you sober, and ultimately what's going to keep you happy. Because whether or not I'm quote unquote an alcoholic, my life has gotten tremendously better since removing alcohol. So why would I ever reintroduce it into my life? Nothing good comes of a glass of wine at dinner for me.
Yeah, I mean, and I'm the same. Like for me, abstinence is so much easier. There's a saying that 99%'s a bitch and 100%
Yep.
is bliss. And I'm
Yes.
like, yeah, that's like moderation right there.
I love that. Yeah.
So you found a place, a group that resonates with you. What would you recommend to anyone that's starting out? Or, if there is a young mom listening to the podcast, what
Hmm.
would you say?
Yeah. So I would say, the first thing I would say is try your absolute best to get honest. When I look at those last few weeks of my drinking, I was lying so much. I was lying to my family. I was lying to my therapist. I was lying to myself. I couldn't get honest about what was happening. And of course, I didn't fully understand what was happening to me at the time. I was drunk most of the time. So how could I wrap my head fully around what I was experiencing? But as soon as I stopped lying, I just felt like this enormous weight had been lifted off of my shoulders. Like once I could finally sit down with my husband and say, this is what I've really been experiencing these last couple of months. All of those times that you suspected that I might be drinking or that I drank more than I said I did, you were right. And although those are such difficult conversations to have because, you have to rehash the past, you have to look at the mistakes that you've made, you have to look at your loved one that you've hurt. I mean, for me, I caused a lot of worry and pain to people really close to me. And that's something that I'm still working through 9 months later. And I don't think that I'm close to putting that behind me yet. That's a work in progress. But if you are out there and you're struggling, tell somebody. And I say that it could be a complete stranger. That is the first thing that I did. I reached out to a complete stranger on Instagram one night while drinking, which I know happens a lot, when you're drinking and you need help. That's when you get the courage to ask for help. But that's what I did. I reached out to a complete stranger who was public about recovery. And the next morning, woke up, had a message back from him with a link to a treatment center, contact information for somebody that helped him get sober. And in that moment, I realized like there are resources out there. Like there are people who understand this and can help me. And that really changed everything for me. I didn't get sober the next day. It took more time, but just, saying out loud that I was struggling and I needed help to a complete stranger opened up the doors for me to think about a future in which I did address the problem and I did eventually get help. And ultimately that is what happened. It wasn't pretty by any means. It was a very messy road, but it did get me there. So I would say that is the first thing. And that it's one of the hardest things, to tell somebody that you're struggling, or to admit to yourself that you're struggling. But ultimately it's what's gonna help you get better. So that would be my advice.
Yeah, getting honest with yourself. I had read something about gaslighting, and I was like, I was
Mm-hmm.
gaslighting myself
Yeah.
when I was
Yes.
drinking. Like seriously.
100%.
So that's a great one. Um, is there anything you wish you would have known when you started out? I mean, I guess you kind of alluded to doing more of a recovery detox program. Would there be
Yes.
anything else?
Yes. I think the other thing that I really wish I had known, and I've heard you talk about this on prior episodes, is that the pain and anxiety that I experienced trying to moderate, every time I would go out thinking, I'm only going to have this many drinks, and never being able to stick to that, and being consumed by thoughts of drinking, even when I wasn't drinking. So, like, Saturday night, if there was something happening Saturday night where I'd be drinking, I would wake up thinking about that event. So while I was in active addiction, just constantly thinking about, something related to alcohol or thinking about trying to moderate, and not being able to. So for example, setting a goal for myself to go out and only have 3 drinks and not being able to stick to that. And then the anxiety that causes you, and the sense of, shame and failure. I used to think like, well, if I remove alcohol altogether, then I'm just going to feel miserable all the time. Like, I'm just going to think about wanting to drink all the time if I can't ever drink. And what I've learned since is that it is the complete opposite. Once you stop trying to moderate, if you've realized that you can't moderate, all of that stress goes away. I mean, it takes time, of course, and there are still days that I think about drinking. It's not left me completely, but I just feel a sense of freedom now that I never felt before, now that I've removed it completely. And I just never thought that it would be that way. I thought it would be a lot harder. And I don't say that, and I don't want to say that recovery isn't hard, because it definitely is. But just in regards to that moderation piece, and trying to keep your drinking under control, once you remove the alcohol altogether, that really does go away, and you feel so much better.
Oh yeah, it and taking up so much brain space. Like
So much.
that's why I say like sobriety is a superpower. I
Yes.
feel smarter.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I'm
Yeah.
just a better thinker and I'm a better doer, and I think a lot of people feel that too.
Yeah. I think that's an important part to talk about too, for somebody who, for loved ones trying to support somebody in recovery. When I've shared that part of it, I had dinner with two close friends recently, and I shared a little bit about that. Just like, I just thought about drinking all the time. And they both were like, really? Like, what was that like? Like, I never knew that. I can't imagine what that would feel like. And I think it's just an important part to talk about, because you're in your own head. Like, nobody else knows what's happening in there. And when you share that piece of it, I think it really helps people who don't struggle. I think it helps them understand a little bit better, how much energy the addiction and compulsion can take over.
Yeah, it really can. Well, how has your life changed since you've been alcohol free these last 9 months?
Oh man. I mean, so many things have changed. Getting honest about my struggles and my sobriety have created improved relationships. My parents, my husband's parents, friends, just so many improvements there. And I can truly say that I just feel like a better person. I feel like a better sister. I feel like a better wife. I feel like and so much better mom. My relationship with my daughter, I mean, I can say now that for the last 9 months, I've been fully present with her. And I cannot imagine a world in which I wouldn't be present. She changes every single day. She does something new every day. And I'm so thankful that I'm not missing it. And then the other thing that I would say has changed is, when you are drinking, I'm sure that you can relate to this, when you have those first one or two drinks, you get that rush of endorphins. You feel really good. I'd clean the house. I would, meal prep for the week. I would just have all of these like big goals and big ambitions, one or two drinks in. Like, I'm going to work out before the baby gets up every day this week. Or I'm going to, we're going to eat, we're not going to eat carbs this week. Or just, all of these random goals that I would have. And then, you keep drinking and the day deteriorates and all of those things go out the window. And my husband actually said to me the other day, you used to talk about doing all these cool things, like all of these super mom type things. And, it never happened. And now I'm starting to see it, you're really starting to do it. And so I can say that I've committed to, I've worked out at least twice a week for the last 17 or 18 weeks, which I cannot remember the last time I could honestly say that. And things are definitely not perfect. I have the most insane sweet tooth now. I want to eat ice cream every single day. So that's something that I'm working on. But I'm sober, and I have a lot more clarity. Just like you said, you feel smarter. I feel stronger. And I can say that I do feel proud of myself. Like, not every single day, but, just generally speaking, I can look at myself in the mirror again. And I was not able to do that for a really long time.
Fantastic. What are your plans for the future?
So as I mentioned in the beginning, I worked for the same restaurant group for a really long time. So I definitely want to stay involved with them. It's a company that I'm passionate about. But the more involved that I've gotten in, 1,000 hours and talking to you and, going to AA meetings, I really do want to get more involved in the recovery realm. I don't want to say industry. I don't know that I would make it a full-time career, but it has been so helpful for me, holding me accountable to my sobriety, and talking to people who have struggled in the same way that I have has just made me feel so normal. I had dinner with somebody that I met through Instagram, who was also sober recently. And I left that dinner feeling more like myself than I had felt in months. Just being able to sit down at a table with somebody who had gone through similar things as me, and to be able to talk openly about it with someone who understands and has experienced it, was honestly somewhat life-changing for me. Like, that sounds pretty dramatic, but it really was. So I just think, as I continue in my sobriety journey and continue to learn about it. And I just want to get more involved. I want to share my story. I want to be support for anybody who needs support. And, I don't know exactly what the future holds, but that's definitely a big focus of mine. And just, being there for my family, because I have a lot of time to make up for.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you're lucky you started so early with your daughter being so young.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm very thankful for that.
How can someone find you?
So Instagram is definitely the best way to find me. I host every Monday on 1,000 Hours Dry Parents. I host every Thursday on 1,000 Hour Dry Canada. And every post that I put up there, I'll link my personal Instagram, which is just my last name _Kristen. So that's definitely the best way to find me. And if you want to reach out to me on Instagram, I would happily share, email, phone number, as I post on 1,000 Hours. At this point in my journey, I would consider myself an open book. I might not fully share every single detail on an Instagram story, but if you want to hear everything I experienced at this point, it's definitely something that I want to talk about.
Well, thank you for coming on the podcast to talk about it. I think this is...
Thank you so much.
Yeah, I think this is going to help people, especially young mothers, and just anyone looking to change their relationship with alcohol. So thank you for sharing.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me on. It was great.
Yes, we will keep in touch.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Hey everyone, thank you so much for listening to this episode of The Alcohol Tipping Point. I'm always here for you guys, so please feel free to reach out and talk to me on Instagram at Alcohol Tipping Point, and check out my website, alcoholtippingpoint.com. Again, I hope you can use these tips we talked about for the rest of your week. And until then, see you next time.